***, Part 11, The Dust of Silver Mesa. ***. The autumn wind carried more than dust through Silver Mesa that October morning in 1882. It carried whispers, the kind that stuck to a person's reputation like burrs to wool. Eliza Hart pulled her shawl tighter as she walked the rutted main street toward the schoolhouse, her boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk with the steady rhythm of someone who had somewhere important to be. The Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above, a pale blue canvas interrupted only by the distant Rocky Mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Silver Mesa huddled in the valley below, a collection of weather-beaten buildings that had sprung up around the promise of gold 5 years prior. The promise had mostly turned to dust, like everything else in this part of the territory. But people remained, stubborn as the sagebrush that dotted the surrounding plains. Eliza paused at the corner of Main and 2nd Street, where Mrs. Henderson's boarding house cast a long shadow across the dirt road. Through the window of Garrett's general store, she could see Mr. Garrett arranging canned goods on his shelves, his movements precise and economical. He glanced up, caught her eye, and quickly looked away. 6 months ago, he would have waved. The change had been gradual at first, like the slow erosion of riverbanks, a missed greeting here, a turn back there. But Eliza knew the source as surely as she knew the multiplication tables she taught every morning. It all led back to Mayor Silas Crowley and his growing influence over the town's moral compass. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a modest structure of rough-hewn lumber with a bell tower that listed slightly to the left, courtesy of a lightning strike the previous spring. The bell itself bore a crack down its middle, giving it a mournful, off-key tone that seemed fitting for a town slowly losing its soul. Eliza unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of chalk dust and old wood. 24 desks sat in neat rows, most of them empty these days. The wealthy families had started sending their children to the new academy in Cheyenne, leaving Eliza with the children of miners, ranch hands, and the handful of Mexican families who worked the outlying farms. She didn't mind. These were the children who needed her most. "Morning, Miss Hart." Tommy O'Brien burst through the door, his red hair sticking up at odd angles, despite what Eliza suspected were his mother's best efforts with a comb. Behind him, his sister Lila followed more sedately, her worn dress carefully mended but clean. "Good morning, Tommy, Lila." Eliza smiled, hanging her shawl on the peg by the door. "You're early today." "Ma said we should come straight here," Lila said quietly, her eyes darting to the window. She said there might be trouble in town later." Eliza's hands stilled on the book she was arranging. "What kind of trouble?" Tommy shrugged with the casual indifference of a 10-year-old boy. "Don't know, but Mr. Pike was hanging up some papers outside the newspaper office. Lots of folks were reading them and looking mighty upset. Harlan Pike and his Silver Mesa Gazette." Eliza knew without looking what those papers likely contained. Another editorial about the moral decay threatening their community. No doubt. Pike had a talent for stirring up sentiment without ever quite crossing the line into outright lies. He dealt in implications and insinuations, letting readers draw their own conclusions. More children began arriving, their entrance marked by the usual chaos of lunch pails clattering and voices calling out greetings. Maria Delgado shepherded in her younger brothers, switching seamlessly between Spanish and English as she reminded them to mind their manners. The Wilson boys, sons of a failed prospector turned ranch hand, slumped into their seats with the exhausted air of children who'd already put in several hours of chores. By the time Eliza rang the cracked bell at 8 o'clock sharp, she had 12 students, a far cry from the 35 she'd started with 2 years ago, when the town had welcomed her with open arms and promises of support for education. "Let's begin with our reading," she announced, holding up the worn copy of McGuffey's Reader. "Maria, would you please start with page 42? As Maria's clear voice filled the room, carefully pronouncing each word. Eliza moved between the desks, offering quiet encouragement and correction. This was what mattered. Not the gossip, not the politics, but these young minds eager to learn despite the odds stacked against them. The morning progressed with the familiar rhythm of lessons. Arithmetic for the older students while the younger ones practiced their letters. A geography lesson about the territories and states, with Tommy insisting that Wyoming would surely be a state soon, maybe even next year. A brief recess where the children ran and played in the dusty yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. It was during the lunch hour that Deputy Nora Quinn appeared at the schoolhouse door. The sight of her, tall, wearing trousers and a star, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, never failed to cause a stir among the children. Female deputies were rare as rain in August, but Nora had earned her position through sheer competence and an unwillingness to back down from anyone, including Mayor Crowley. "Miss Hart," Nora said, removing her hat. "Might I have a word?" Eliza stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The two women stood on the small porch, looking out over the town spread below them. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant sound of hammers on anvils drifted from the blacksmith's shop. "I wanted to warn you," Nora said without preamble. "Pike's latest broadsheet is particularly vicious. He's suggesting that unmarried women who insist on teaching are a corrupting influence on impressionable young minds." "He's not mentioning me by name. I assume—" "He doesn't need to. You're the only unmarried female teacher for 100 miles. Nora's jaw tightened. "Crowley's behind it, of course. He's had his eye on this land ever since those surveyor fellows came through last month." "Railroad surveyors." "That's the rumor, though they were mighty secretive about their business." Nora turned to face Eliza directly. "You need to be careful. Crowley plays a long game, but he plays dirty." After Nora left, Eliza stood for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. The sun beat down mercilessly, even in October, and the wind carried the acrid scent of the mining operations from the hills. She thought of the letter she'd received last month from a school in San Francisco, offering her a position with better pay and none of the frontier politics. She'd burned it in her stove that very evening. That afternoon, she had the children practice writing letters. It was a practical skill, she explained, especially for those whose fathers worked away from home in the mines or on cattle drives. "Dear Pa," Tommy read aloud. His pencil gripped tight in concentration. "School is good. Miss Hart is teaching us about the states. I can spell Mississippi now. Mississippi. Ma says to tell you the roof is holding up fine since you fixed it. Please come home soon. Your son, Thomas O'Brien." "Excellent work. Tommy," Eliza said, though her throat felt tight. How many of these fathers would receive such carefully crafted letters? How many would return to find their children changed, grown, educated despite the town's growing hostility toward learning that didn't come with a hefty price tag? As the day wound down and the children prepared to leave, Eliza noticed a rider on the horizon, moving slowly through the heat shimmer rising from the plain. Not unusual in itself, riders came and went constantly in Silver Mesa, but something about the way he sat his horse, the deliberate pace, made her pause at the window to watch. The rider disappeared behind a rise before she could see more, and Lila was tugging at her sleeve with a question about tomorrow's spelling words. Eliza turned away from the window, not knowing that Caleb Ward had just gotten his first glimpse of Silver Mesa, or that their lives would soon intersect in ways that would shake the very foundations of the town's carefully constructed social order. After the last child left, Eliza remained in the empty schoolhouse, sweeping the floor and washing the slate boards. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air no matter how much she cleaned. She paused at her desk, running her fingers over the carved initials some long-ago student had left in the wood. "Education is the great equalizer," she said aloud to the empty room, remembering the words of the professor who had encouraged her to come west. "Even in the wilderness, especially in the wilderness, knowledge is power." She gathered her things, locked the door, and began the walk back to her small rented room behind Mrs. Ortega's restaurant. The wind had picked up again, sending tumbleweeds racing across the street like errant thoughts. As she passed the newspaper office, she couldn't help but glance at the broadsheet tacked to the board outside. The moral responsibility of our town questions. Every citizen must ask. She didn't need to read further. The questions would all lead to the same conclusion, that unmarried women teaching children represented some vague threat to the natural order of things, that education should be reserved for those who could afford it, that people like the Delgado family or the Chinese laundrymen's children had no business sitting in the same classroom as the sons and daughters of respectable citizens. The bell in the church tower, whole and resonant, unlike her poor cracked school bell, began to toll the hour. 5 o'clock. In an hour, the saloons would fill with miners spending their meager earnings. The respectable families would gather for supper, perhaps discussing the very broadsheets she'd just passed. And somewhere, Mayor Crowley would be planning his next move in the chess game he was playing with the town's future. Eliza lifted her chin and quickened her pace. Let them whisper. Let them plan. Tomorrow morning, she would unlock that schoolhouse door again, and any child who wanted to learn would be welcome. It was a small act of defiance, perhaps, but in a town slowly strangling on its own prejudices, even small acts mattered. The dust swirled around her skirts as she walked, and she didn't bother to shake it off. In Silver Mesa, dust was simply part of life, like gossip, like struggle, like the constant battle between those who would build up and those who would tear down. She had chosen her side long ago, and she would stand her ground, even if, in the end, she stood alone. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2, the public shaming asterisk. Asterisk. The handbills appeared overnight like toadstools after rain, plastered on every corner post and storefront in Silver Mesa. By the time Eliza arrived at school Monday morning, half the town had already read them. The bold black letters seemed to scream from the cheap paper. Protecting our children's virtue. An open letter to the citizens of Silver Mesa regarding moral irregularities at the public school. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she tore one from the post outside the schoolhouse. She didn't need to read the entire thing to understand its purpose. Harlan Pike's prose style was as predictable as it was poisonous, carefully worded insinuations wrapped in concern for public welfare. Anna reports of a certain unmarried schoolteacher seen in questionable circumstances with a traveling man. While we name no names, concerned parents must ask themselves who watches over our children's moral education. The accusation was as baseless as it was damaging. Eliza crumpled the paper, then thought better of it and smoothed it out. Evidence, Nora would say. Always keep evidence. Inside the schoolhouse, she found chaos. Several desks had been overturned, and crude words were chalked across her blackboard. Her books lay scattered on the floor, some with pages torn. But it was the message carved deep into her desk that made her sink into her chair. Get out. She was still sitting there, staring at the vandalism, when footsteps on the porch made her look up. For a wild moment, she hoped it might be Nora or even some of her students arriving early. Instead, Mayor Silas Crowley filled the doorway, his substantial frame blocking out the morning light. "Miss Hart," he said, removing his hat with mock courtesy. "Disturbing business, this." Behind him stood Reverend Abel Finch, thin and austere in his black coat, and Harlan Pike, trying unsuccessfully to hide his satisfaction. They entered uninvited, Crowley's expensive boots clicking on the wooden floor. "I assume you've seen the concerned citizen's letter?" Crowley asked, producing a fresh copy from his coat pocket. "Quite troubling allegations." "Lies," Eliza said flatly. "Every word of it." Now, Reverend Finch interjected, his voice oily with false compassion. "No one is accusing you directly, Miss Hart. But when questions arise about moral character, we must think of the children. The children who someone saw fit to lock out of their classroom." Eliza gestured at the overturned desks. Those children. Pike finally spoke, his weasel-like face arranging itself into an expression of concern. The righteous anger of parents protecting their young can sometimes overflow proper bounds. Regrettable, but understandable. Crowley walked slowly around the room, examining the damage with the air of a buyer inspecting goods. The school board will be meeting this afternoon. In light of recent concerns, we'll be discussing your position. I'd suggest you attend 2 o'clock sharp at the town hall. They left as abruptly as they'd come, but their presence lingered like smoke. Eliza spent the next hour setting the room to rights, her movements automatic. When the children began arriving, she had managed to clean most of the ugly words from the board, though ghostly traces remained. "What happened, Miss Hart?" Maria Delgado asked, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Nothing that soap and water can't fix," Eliza replied, forcing a smile. "Now, let's begin our lessons. We have much to cover today." But concentration proved impossible. The children were restless, picking up on the undercurrent of tension. Several families had kept their children home, leaving only 8 students. Tommy and Lila O'Brien sat closer together than usual, and even Tommy's usual exuberance was dampened. At noon, Lupe Ortega appeared with a basket of food. The older Mexican woman's face was set in hard lines as she surveyed the damage that remained visible despite Eliza's efforts. "Cobardes," she muttered, setting out tortillas and beans for the children. "Cowards who attack in darkness. You come to my place tonight. Miss Hart, you shouldn't be alone." "I'll be fine. Mrs. Ortega." "No arguments. My Roberto. He knows what they're planning. That Crowley, he wants this land for the railroad money. The school is just—" She made a dismissive gesture. "Como se dice? Excuse." The afternoon crawled by. At 1:30, Eliza dismissed the children early. Tommy lingered at the door, his young face troubled. "Miss Hart, you ain't really going away, are you?" She knelt to his level, meeting his eyes. "I'm going to do my very best to stay right here. Tommy, sometimes adults have disagreements, but that doesn't mean we give up. Remember what we learned about persistence." He nodded solemnly, then surprised her with a quick hug before running after his sister. The town hall was crowded when Eliza arrived. It seemed half of Silver Mesa had turned out for the impromptu school board meeting. She recognized faces she'd once considered friendly, now carefully avoiding her gaze. Others, like Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, looked uncomfortable but remained silent. In the back row, Nora Quinn stood with her arms crossed, her deputy's badge catching the light from the windows. The school board consisted of 5 members, all men, all closely allied with Crowley's interests. They sat behind a raised table like judges at a tribunal. Crowley himself occupied the center seat, gavel in hand. "This meeting will come to order," he announced, the gavel crack echoing in the room. "We're here to address concerns about the moral standards at our public school." What followed was a carefully orchestrated performance, one by one. Concerned citizens stood to voice their worries. Mrs. Pritchard, whose husband owned shares in Crowley's mining operation, tearfully wondered aloud about influences on impressionable young minds. Mr. Garrett from the general store mumbled something about the need for teachers to be above reproach. Then Reverend Finch took the floor, Bible in hand. His sermon, for that's what it was, lasted nearly 20 minutes, weaving together scripture and innuendo into a tapestry of condemnation without ever actually naming a specific transgression. "The Lord tells us to avoid even the appearance of evil," he intoned, his voice rising to fill the room. "When questions arise about those who shape our children's souls, we must act decisively to protect the innocent." Throughout it all, Eliza sat straight-backed and silent, her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago that defending oneself against shadows only gave them more substance. Let them exhaust their rhetoric first. Finally, Crowley called for her response. The room fell silent as she stood, every eye upon her. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I have taught in this school for 2 years. In that time, I have never missed a day, never turned away a child who wanted to learn, and never compromised the trust placed in me. These accusations—" "No one has accused you of anything," Pike interrupted smoothly. "We're simply discussing standards. These implications, then," Eliza continued, "are based on nothing more than malicious gossip. I challenge anyone here to present one piece of actual evidence of wrongdoing." Crowley smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Miss Hart, in matters of moral character, perception itself carries weight. A teacher must be like Caesar's wife, above suspicion." "Then I assume the same standard applies to all public servants?" Eliza asked. "Including those who profit from land deals while serving on town councils?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Crowley's face darkened, but before he could respond, Pike stood up, waving a piece of paper. "If Miss Hart demands evidence, perhaps she can explain this assigned statement from a traveler who stayed at Henderson's boarding house last month. He mentions seeing a woman matching Miss Hart's description in questionable circumstances late one evening." Eliza felt the trap closing. "May I see this statement?" "The witness wishes to remain anonymous for obvious reasons," Pike replied. "How convenient." Nora Quinn's voice cut through the room. The deputy strode forward, her boot heels ringing on the floor. "An anonymous accusation isn't worth the paper it's written on. Any court in the territory would throw it out." "This isn't a court, deputy," Crowley said coldly. "It's a discussion of community standards." "Still sounds like a trial to me." Someone called from the back. Eliza recognized Doc Whitlow's gravelly voice. "And where I come from, the accused gets to face their accuser." But the board members were already conferring among themselves, a piece of theater as predetermined as the rest. After a few moments of whispered consultation, Crowley raised his gavel. "In light of the concerns raised today, the board votes to place Miss Hart on temporary suspension pending a full investigation. School will be closed until we can arrange a suitable replacement." The gavel fell with finality. The room erupted. Some applauded, others protested. Eliza heard Lupe Ortega's voice raised in rapid Spanish, most of it unprintable. Through it all, she remained standing, her eyes fixed on Crowley. He met her gaze with satisfaction, and she understood with crystal clarity that this had never been about morality. It was about power, land, and money, the holy trinity of frontier justice. Outside, a small group gathered around her. Nora, Lupe, Doc Whitlow, and surprisingly, the Chinese laundryman, Mr. Chen, who rarely involved himself in town politics. "This isn't over," Nora said grimly. "I'll wire the territorial marshal. There are laws." "Laws that take time," Eliza interrupted gently. "And meanwhile, the children have no school." "Then we make our own school." Lupe declared, "You teach in my back room, or the old barn behind my restaurant. Let them try to stop us." As the group dispersed, making plans, Eliza noticed a rider at the far end of the street. He sat motionless on his horse, watching the crowd disperse from the town hall. Something about his stillness, the way he seemed to take in every detail without appearing to look, caught her attention. Then someone passed between them, and when she looked again, he was gone. That evening, alone in her room, despite Lupe's protests, Eliza sat at her small table and wrote in her journal, "They have taken my school, but not my purpose. Tomorrow I will gather what books I can salvage and continue teaching wherever I can find space. If they think shame will drive me away, they have badly misjudged their opponent. I came to this town to educate children, and that is what I will do, with or without their permission." Outside her window, The wind howled across the empty plains, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack. The sound was wild and defiant, and Eliza found herself smiling. Even here, in this place that seemed determined to crush anything that didn't conform, life found a way to persist. She sealed her journal and prepared for bed, not knowing that miles away, Caleb Ward was making camp under the stars, studying a crumpled handbill he'd found blowing across the prairie, a handbill about a schoolteacher and a town's moral concerns. He'd seen such things before, in other towns, and recognized the pattern. By morning, he would alter his route to pass through Silver Mesa, just to deliver some mail. He would tell himself, nothing more. But sometime, the most significant journeys begin with the smallest detours. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 3. The Rider Who Wouldn't Draw Asterisk, asterisk. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just past noon, a solitary disturbance in the vast Wyoming sky. Caleb Ward rode steady and unhurried, his bay mare picking her way along the rutted trail that served as Silver Mesa's main connection to the outside world. He'd been riding since dawn, the mail pouch secure in his saddlebags. But his thoughts kept returning to the crumpled handbill in his pocket. 32 years had taught him to read towns like other men read books, the placement of buildings, the condition of the streets, the way people moved, all told stories to those who knew how to look. As Silver Mesa came into view, Caleb saw a town at war with itself. The neat prosperity of the main street contrasted sharply with the ramshackle edges where the real work got done. A place of two faces, neither entirely honest. He guided his mare to the post office, a narrow building squeezed between the bank and a millinery shop. Through the window, he could see the postmaster sorting mail with the mechanical movements of a man who'd done the same task for decades. "Afternoon," Caleb said, entering with the mail pouch. "Got the Cheyenne delivery." The postmaster, a thin man with nervous hands, barely glanced up. "Just leave it on the counter. I'll sort it directly." Caleb set down the pouch, but didn't immediately leave. "Looking for a meal and a bed for the night? Any recommendations?" "Henderson's boarding house is respectable," the man replied, then hesitated. "Though, if you want good food, folks say Mrs. Ortega's place serves the best, even if it is," he trailed off. "Even if it is what?" "Mexican establishment," the postmaster finished, as if the words themselves were slightly distasteful. "Behind the Lutheran church." Caleb touched his hat brim and left, filing away the interaction. A town that qualified its recommendations based on ancestry was a town with deep divisions. He led his mare down the street, noting the clusters of people talking in low voices, the way conversations stopped when strangers passed. He was tying his horse to the post outside Ortega's when the trouble started. 3 men emerged from the saloon across the street, their gait unsteady with afternoon drinking. Caleb recognized the type. Not quite outlaws, not quite citizens, the kind who found courage in numbers and whiskey. They were following someone, calling out comments that carried on the wind. Then he saw her. A woman in a simple gray dress walked ahead of them, her back straight, a basket of books balanced on her hip. She didn't hurry, didn't acknowledge the men, but Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her free hand clenched at her skirts. "Come now, Miss Teacher," one of the men called, his voice slurred. "No students to hide behind now. Why don't you give us a lesson in those loose morals Pike's been writing about?" The woman, this must be the schoolteacher from the handbill, stopped and turned. Caleb found himself straightening, his hand instinctively checking the position of his colt, though he didn't draw. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "You appear to be confused. The saloon is behind you. I suggest you return to it." The largest of the 3, a man with a belly that strained his vest buttons, laughed unpleasantly. "Listen to her, boys, still giving orders like she's somebody important." They moved closer. spreading out in a practiced way that suggested this wasn't their first time intimidating someone. Caleb had seen enough. He stepped away from his horse, his spurs ringing against the boardwalk. "Afternoon," he said pleasantly, positioning himself between the woman and the men. "Seems like you fellows are headed the wrong direction. Lady said the saloon's that way." The big man squinted at him, trying to focus. "This ain't your business, stranger." "You're right," Caleb agreed, his hand hanging loose at his side. "But I'm making it my business. See, I've been riding all day, and I'm tired. Too tired to watch 3 grown men bother a lady. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to her. Then you're going to walk away." "Or what?" one of the others. Younger and trying to prove himself. Let his hand drift toward his pistol. Caleb's voice never changed, remaining conversationally calm. "Son, I can see from here you've got your gun tied down wrong. By the time you fumble it clear, this'll be over. But here's the thing, I don't want to draw. Once a gun clears leather, somebody usually bleeds. So let's all be smart." There was a long moment of tension, the kind that could tip either way. Then the big man laughed, but it was forced. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway. Come on, boys." They retreated, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Caleb waited until they were back inside the saloon before turning to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat. "You all right?" She was studying him with intelligent hazel eyes, seeming to weigh what she saw. "Yes, thank you, though I suspect you've just made yourself unpopular with certain elements in town." "Wouldn't be the first time." He gestured to her basket of books. "Those look heavy. Can I help you carry them somewhere?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'd appreciate that. They're going to the old barn behind Ortega's restaurant. I'm holding classes there since—" She paused. "Since circumstances required a change of venue." They walked in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I'm Eliza Hart." "Caleb Ward. I deliver mail through the territory." "And you make a habit of intervening in local disputes?" "Only when they're 3-on-1 and the one is carrying school books." He glanced at her. "Seems like teaching's become a dangerous profession in Silver Mesa." "Everything worth doing carries some risk." "Mr. Ward." They'd reached the barn, a sturdy structure that had seen better days. "Would you like to come in, Mrs.? Ortega always has coffee brewing." The barn's interior surprised him. What should have been a dusty storage space had been transformed into a makeshift classroom. Boards laid across barrels served as desks, and a painted piece of wood nailed to the wall functioned as a blackboard. Despite the humble surroundings, everything was clean and organized. "Impressive," Caleb said, setting the books on a crate that served as the teacher's desk. "The children deserve better, but we make do." Eliza began unpacking the books, handling each one with care. Their education shouldn't suffer because adults can't behave civilly. An older Mexican woman appeared in the doorway, connecting the barn to the restaurant kitchen. This had to be Mrs. Ortega. Her face showed the lines of hard work and laughter in equal measure. "Eliza, who is—" She stopped, taking in Caleb with a quick, assessing glance. "Ah, you're the one who just sent those borrachos packing. Sit, coffee and food, no arguments." Before either could protest, she disappeared back into the kitchen. Eliza smiled, the first genuine expression Caleb had seen from her. "Lupe Ortega doesn't take no for an answer. You might as well sit." They sat on upturned crates as Lupe returned with strong coffee and plates of beans and tortillas. As they ate, Caleb found himself telling Eliza about his work, the long routes between towns, the people depending on letters from far away, the way the frontier was changing with each passing year. "Must be lonely," Eliza observed, "all that time on the trail." "Sometimes, but lonely's not always bad. Gives a man time to think." He paused. "What about you? How does a school teacher end up holding classes in a barn?" She told him then, her voice matter-of-fact, about the false accusations, the school board meeting, the town's power structure. Caleb listened without interrupting, reading between the lines. He'd seen this pattern before. Progress threatening profit, education challenging established order. "So, they want the school land," he said when she finished. "Let me guess. Railroads coming through?" "That's Deputy Quinn's theory, though proving it is another matter." "Railroad surveyors were through here last month," Lupe interjected, refilling their coffee. "Very quiet, very quick, but Roberto saw them measuring near the school." The afternoon was fading when the barn door opened and children began arriving. They came in small groups, some brought by parents who nodded gratefully to Eliza before hurrying away. Caleb was surprised by the diversity Mexican children. A few he guessed were Irish, even 2 Chinese children who bowed politely before taking their seats. "Mr. Ward, would you mind staying for the lesson?" Eliza asked. "The children could benefit from hearing about your travels." He found himself agreeing, though public speaking wasn't his strong suit. But as the lesson progressed, he discovered the children's curiosity was infectious. They peppered him with questions about the places he'd been, the people he'd met, hanging on every word about distant territories and growing towns. "Have you ever seen an outlaw?" Tommy O'Brien asked, eyes wide. Caleb considered his answer carefully. "A few. But here's what I learned. Most outlaws aren't born bad. They're folks who made wrong choices, then kept making them because they didn't see another way." "But you carry a gun," the boy pointed out. "I do, for protection, not for starting trouble." Caleb met Eliza's eyes across the room. "A gun's a tool, like a hammer or a saw. It's the hand holding it that makes it good or bad." After the children left, Caleb helped Eliza tidy the makeshift classroom. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that only the high plains could produce. "Thank you," Eliza said, "for earlier, and for staying. The children enjoyed your stories." "They're good kids. Shame they have to learn in a barn." "A barn, a palace, or under a tree, it doesn't matter where, as long as they're learning." She paused at the door. "Will you be staying in town long?" "Day or 2. Got some repairs needed on my saddle, and my horse could use the rest." It wasn't entirely true, but he found himself reluctant to leave just yet. "Then perhaps you'd consider helping with the repairs here, the roof leaks. And with the weather turning?" She gestured at the gaps in the barn siding. "I'll take a look tomorrow," he promised. That evening, in his room at Mrs. Ortega's, he'd decided against the boarding house after all. Caleb sat at the window watching the town settle into darkness. Oil lamps flickered in windows, and somewhere a guitar played a mournful melody. He thought about Eliza Hart, teaching in a barn because she wouldn't bend to the town's prejudices. Thought about the children, eager to learn despite everything. He'd spent years avoiding attachments, keeping to the trails where a man could be alone with his ghosts. But something about this place, these people, made him want to stay a while longer. Maybe it was the principle of the thing. He'd always hated bullies, whether they wore expensive suits or trail dust. Or maybe it was the way Eliza had looked at him, not with fear or fascination at his gun, but with a quiet assessment that suggested she saw past the weapon to the man. Whatever the reason, come morning he'd start patching that roof. It was a small thing, but Caleb had learned that sometimes small things mattered most. A secure roof could keep out more than just rain. It could keep out despair, keep in hope. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and Caleb found himself thinking of his own ghosts, the reasons he kept moving, never settling. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe a barn in Silver Mesa was as good a place as any to make a stand. He pulled off his boots and prepared for bed, his gun hanging on the bedpost within easy reach. Old habits died hard, and despite the peaceful evening, he knew the kind of men who'd confronted Eliza wouldn't forget being faced down by a stranger. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb Ward looked forward to morning. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 4. The Kiss in the Town Square, asterisk, asterisk. The morning of the town meeting dawned cold and bright, with a cutting wind that promised winter's approach. Caleb had been in Silver Mesa for a week now, each day finding new reasons to delay his departure. The barn roof no longer leaked, the walls had been reinforced, and he'd even built proper desks from salvaged lumber. But it wasn't the repairs that kept him there. He stood at the edge of town, watching riders approach from various directions. Word had spread that Mayor Crowley was calling a special public morality hearing in the town square. The official notice, posted on every corner, left no doubt about its purpose: to address the continued defiance of community standards and to take final action regarding the unauthorized educational activities occurring within town limits. "They mean to run her out," Nora Quinn said, appearing at his elbow. The deputy's face was grim. "I've seen it before. Public humiliation, then exile, very civilized. And legal. Legal enough for a frontier town. The territorial judge won't interfere in what he'll call local matters." She studied him. "You planning to attend?" "Wouldn't miss it." Nora's smile was sharp as a blade. "Good. We might need someone who thinks with his head instead of his gun, though keep that iron loose, just in case." The town square was already filling when they arrived. A raised platform had been erected in front of the courthouse, complete with a podium and seats for what Crowley was calling the Council of Concerned Citizens. The whole thing had the air of a theatrical production, which Caleb supposed it was. Eliza stood near the platform, wearing her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She held herself with quiet dignity, surrounded by her supporters Lupe Ortega, Doc Whitlow, and a handful of parents whose children attended her barn school. They were vastly outnumbered by Crowley's faction, who filled the square with self-righteous energy. "Look at her," someone near Caleb muttered, "bold as brass, like she's done nothing wrong." "Maybe because she hasn't," Caleb said quietly, causing the speaker to move hastily away. Mayor Crowley took the platform, resplendent in his best suit, looking every inch the prosperous civic leader. Behind him sat Pike, Reverend Finch, and 3 other members of the town's elite. Crowley raised his hands for silence. "Citizens of Silver Mesa," he began, his voice carrying across the square. "We gather today to address a cancer in our community. Despite repeated warnings and the clear will of respectable society, certain elements continue to defy proper order." What followed was a masterpiece of character assassination. Crowley painted a picture of moral decay, of standards abandoned, of innocent children exposed to dangerous ideas from an unmarried woman of questionable reputation. Pike took his turn, reading selected passages from his editorials, his reedy voice dripping with false concern. Reverend Finch invoked scripture, twisting verses to support their predetermined conclusion. Through it all, Eliza stood silent, her chin raised, eyes fixed on some point beyond the crowd. Caleb could see the toll it was taking, the slight tremor in her clasped hands, the way she pressed her lips together. But she didn't break. And so, Crowley concluded, "We call upon Miss Hart to voluntarily leave Silver Mesa within 3 days. Furthermore, the property currently used for her illegal school will be transferred to the town council for proper development. Any who continue to support these unauthorized activities will face consequences." The crowd stirred, some applauding, others murmuring uneasily. This was the moment. Eliza would be given a chance to speak, to defend herself. But what could one voice do against such orchestrated condemnation? Caleb made his decision. He pushed through the crowd, his spurs ringing against the wooden platform as he climbed the steps. Gasps and exclamations followed his progress. Crowley's face darkened. "Sir, this is a private civic matter." Caleb ignored him, striding directly to where Eliza stood. Their eyes met, and in that instant, a universe of communication passed between them. "Trust me," his gaze said. Her slight nod gave permission. He pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss, nor was it rough. It was deliberate, public, a declaration that rang louder than any words. For a heartbeat, Eliza stood frozen. Then her hand came up to rest against his chest, not pushing away but not pulling closer either, maintaining her dignity even in this moment of staged intimacy. When they parted, Caleb turned to face the stunned crowd, keeping one arm protectively around Eliza's shoulders. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "you've been saying a lot about this lady's reputation. Well, I'm here to set the record straight. A schoolteacher was shamed by this town, until I rode in, kissed her, and now I'm claiming her as my intended bride." The square erupted. Women gasped, men shouted, and Crowley's face turned an alarming shade of purple. But Caleb wasn't finished. "See, where I come from, when a man's woman is insulted, he's got the right to demand satisfaction. Now, I could call out each of you who spread lies about Miss Hart. Pike. That would be you first. But Miss Hart doesn't believe in violence. So instead, I'll just say this: any further insults to my fiancée will be considered personal insults to me, and I take those very seriously." "This is absurd," Crowley sputtered. "You can't just—" "Can't I?" Caleb's hand rested casually near his gun. "Seems to me you folks put a lot of stock in propriety. Well, nothing more proper than a woman being protected by her intended husband, unless you're suggesting there's something improper about our engagement." The trap was neat. If they continued to attack Eliza, they'd be attacking an engaged woman, which even frontier propriety frowned upon. If they backed down, they'd lose face. Reverend Finch cleared his throat. "Well, if there's to be a wedding—" "When Miss Hart decides," Caleb said firmly. "A man can claim, but a lady chooses. That's the proper way, isn't it, Reverend—" Later, in the privacy of Lupe's kitchen, Eliza finally spoke. "That was unexpected," she said carefully. Caleb sat across from her, hat in hand, looking more uncomfortable than he had facing down armed men. "I apologize for the liberty. It seemed the only way to break their narrative. A fallen woman is fair game, but a spoken-for woman—" He shrugged. "Different rules." "Very clever," Eliza acknowledged. "Though you realize what you've done, they'll expect an actual engagement now." "Only as long as needed," Caleb assured her. "Once this blows over, we can quietly part ways. You can say I turned out unsuitable. No harm to your reputation. If anything, it might improve it." "The woman who rejected a gunman." Eliza studied him for a long moment. "Is that what you are, a gunman?" "It's what I was, what I'm trying not to be anymore." He met her gaze. "I meant what I said out there, about the violence. I've seen enough of it to know it doesn't solve anything, but sometimes the threat is enough. And if it's not, then we'll face that when it comes." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing here, teaching those children, it's the bravest thing I've seen in a long time." "Brave," Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm terrified every day, afraid they'll win, that the children will suffer for my stubbornness. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." He settled his hat on his head. "I'll be around if you need me." "And Miss Hart?" That kiss was strictly for show, but I won't lie, I didn't mind it as much as I probably should have. He left before she could respond, but he caught her smile as he closed the door. The rest of the day brought unexpected consequences. Some of Crowley's supporters, confused by the sudden turn of events, began to distance themselves from the campaign against Eliza. After all, persecuting an engaged woman was quite different from driving out a loose woman. Others doubled down, suggesting that the engagement itself was proof of her unsavory character. But the children came to the barn school that afternoon in greater numbers than before. Some were brought by parents who saw Caleb's intervention as a sign that Eliza had powerful protection. Others came out of simple curiosity, wanting to see the woman who'd caused such a spectacular scene. "Is it true, Miss Hart?" Lila O'Brien asked shyly. "Are you really going to marry that man?" Eliza chose her words carefully. "Mr. Ward and I have an understanding. Sometimes adults make arrangements for practical reasons. What matters is that you're all here to learn." As the sun set over Silver Mesa, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Caleb sat on the porch of Ortega's restaurant, cleaning his rifle. It was busy work. The gun was already spotless, but it gave his hands something to do while his mind wrestled with the day's events. He'd acted on instinct, seeing a way to use the town's own prejudices against them. But somewhere between the planned kiss and Eliza's quiet acceptance, something had shifted. The feel of her in his arms, the way she'd trusted him despite having every reason not to, it stirred something he'd thought long dead. "Complicated your life pretty good today," Nora Quinn observed, joining him on the porch. Seemed like the right thing at the time. "Oh, it was brilliant," Nora admitted. "Crowley's fit to be tied. He can't figure out how to proceed now. But you know this isn't over." "I know. They'll come at you both differently now, subtle-like. Try to prove the engagement is fake or dig up dirt on you." She paused. "Is there dirt to dig?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Every man's got dirt. Deputy, question is whether it's the kind that matters." Nora nodded, understanding. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you did good today. That took courage, using words instead of lead. Man I used to ride with told me once that the fastest gun in the world was the one that never had to be drawn. Took me a long time to understand what he meant." As night fell over Silver Mesa, Caleb remained on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Somewhere in town, Crowley and his allies were undoubtedly plotting their next move. Let them come. He'd faced worse than small-town bullies and lived to tell about it. What worried him more was the warmth he'd felt when Eliza smiled, the way her hand had felt resting against his chest. He'd come to Silver Mesa to deliver mail, and had somehow found himself in the middle of a war for the town's soul. Worse, he was starting to care about the outcome. That was dangerous thinking for a man who'd sworn never to put down roots again. But as he sat in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the town, Caleb Ward wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from the past and start building a future. Even if that future began with a kiss that was supposed to mean nothing and somehow meant everything. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 5. Uncovering the Truth. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning after the town square confrontation, Nora Quinn stood in the doorway of the barn school, a folder of papers clutched in her hand. Her usually composed face showed signs of a sleepless night, but her eyes burned with determination. "I've been doing some digging," she announced to Eliza and Caleb, who were preparing the day's lessons. "Remember those railroad surveyors well? I sent some telegrams to friends in Cheyenne." She spread the papers on the makeshift desk. "The Northern Pacific Railway has plans for a spur line. Guess where it's supposed to run?" Caleb studied the rough map Nora had sketched. "Right through the school property." "Not just through it," Nora corrected. "The school sits on what would be the perfect location for a depot. Flat land, good water access, center of town. Worth a fortune if the railroad comes through." Eliza sank onto a crate. The implications clear. "So all of this, the moral accusations, the public shamings, just a way to get you out and seize the land." Caleb finished. "Crowley must have gotten advance word about the railroad plans. The question is," Nora said, "can we prove it?" That afternoon, while Eliza taught, Caleb and Nora visited the town clerk's office. The clerk, a nervous man named Pemberton, grew increasingly agitated as Nora requested various land records. "I'm afraid those documents are restricted," he stammered. "Mayor's orders. Only authorized personnel." "I'm a deputy sheriff. Nora said patiently. That makes me authorized? Yes, but that is, the mayor said specifically. Caleb leaned against the counter, his presence quietly intimidating. Mr. Pemberton, seems to me public records should be public, unless there's something in them the mayor doesn't want seen. Pemberton's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I could lose my position. You could lose more than that if you're party to land fraud, Nora pointed out. Now, about those records. An hour later, they emerged with several interesting discoveries. The school land had been deeded to the town in perpetuity for educational purposes. It couldn't legally be sold or transferred without a special vote. Moreover, there were discrepancies in recent council meeting minutes, suggestions that decisions had been made outside official channels. It's not enough, Nora said, frustration evident. We need something concrete, proof that Crowley knew about the railroad before he started this campaign against Eliza. That evening, as purple shadows lengthened across the prairie, Caleb found himself at Pike's newspaper office. The building was dark, Pike presumably drinking at one of the saloons. It would be easy to break in, to search for evidence. The old Caleb would have done it without hesitation. But he'd promised Eliza no violence, and breaking and entering, even for a good cause, was still a crime. Instead, he circled to the back alley where the newspaper's trash was burned. Sometimes the best evidence was what people threw away. He was sifting through partially burned papers when a voice made him freeze. Looking for something specific, Caleb turned slowly to find a young man watching him, Pike's apprentice, barely 16, with ink-stained fingers and intelligent eyes. Just curious about what news doesn't make it to print, Caleb said carefully. The boy, Samuel Jenkins, Caleb remembered, glanced around nervously. You're the one who stood up for Miss Hart. That's right. Samuel seemed to wrestle with himself, then reached into his jacket. Mister, Pike had me set some type last week. Special job, he said, not for the regular paper, but I kept a proof copy. He handed Caleb a folded sheet. Miss Hart taught me to read when no one else would bother with a printer's devil. Figure I owe her. The proof sheet was damning. It was a draft contract between Crowley and the Northern Pacific Railway, promising him a percentage of profits from the depot in exchange for securing the land, dated weeks before the first attacks on Eliza began. This could destroy them, Caleb said. That's why I kept it. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. But I can't testify. Pike would ruin me, and I need this job. My mother. I understand, Caleb assured him. We'll find another way. You've done enough. The next morning brought an unexpected storm. Dark clouds rolled in from the mountains, bringing cold rain that turned the streets to mud. The barn school's roof, despite Caleb's repairs, developed new leaks, and Eliza moved the children into tight clusters to avoid the drips. Perhaps we should dismiss early, she suggested, watching Tommy O'Brien catch water in his slate board. No, Miss Hart, the children chorused. They'd become fiercely protective of their school, as if they understood that every day of learning was a victory against those who would deny them. Caleb and Nora used the cover of the storm to visit the telegraph office. The operator, a man who owed Nora several favors, allowed them to review recent messages. What they found confirmed their suspicions: coded telegrams between Crowley and railroad officials, discussions of land prices and profit sharing. We need more, Nora insisted as they sheltered under the hotel's awning. Something that ties Pike to this directly. The newspapers have been Crowley's biggest weapon. That's when fate intervened in the form of Harlan Pike himself, stumbling drunk from the Silver Mine saloon. The rain had driven most people indoors, leaving the streets nearly empty. Pike weaved his way toward his office, fumbling with his keys. Can't even see straight, Caleb observed. Man like that might leave his office unlocked. Nora gave him a sharp look. We can't break in. No, Caleb agreed. But if the door happened to be open and we happened to notice documents in plain sight that pertain to an ongoing investigation, They waited until Pike had entered his office, then followed. Sure enough, in his intoxicated state, Pike had left the door ajar. They could see him slumped over his desk, already snoring. Moving carefully, they entered the office. Pike's desk was a mess of papers, bottles, and printing materials. Among them, clearly visible, were photographic plates and equipment, the tools of a different kind of deception. "Look at this," Nora whispered, holding up a glass plate negative. It showed a woman who vaguely resembled Eliza in what appeared to be a compromising situation, but held to the light. The manipulation was obvious, 2 images crudely combined. "He's been creating false evidence," Caleb said grimly. "These plates, with the right printing techniques, would look real enough to fool most people." Nora finished. She pocketed several plates. Evidence in an ongoing investigation. They were about to leave when Pike stirred, mumbling in his sleep. "Crowley promised 50%. Just need the teacher gone." Nora and Caleb exchanged glances. Sometimes the best evidence came from a man's own mouth. The storm continued through the night. In the barn school, Eliza and Lupe worked by lamplight to move the most vulnerable books and supplies to dry corners. Caleb arrived with canvas tarps liberated from a freight wagon, and together they created a somewhat waterproof classroom. "You know," Eliza said, wringing water from her skirts, "there's something almost poetic about it. They're trying to wash us away, and here's heaven doing it literally." "Heaven's rain doesn't choose sides," Caleb replied, securing a tarp. "But it does reveal character. Look who's here helping and who's staying dry at home." Indeed, throughout the evening, parents and supporters arrived with supplies, food, and willing hands. Doc Whitlow brought his medical bag in case anyone caught cold. Mr. Chen appeared with hot tea and dry blankets. Even some who'd been neutral in the conflict showed up, moved by the sight of children determined to learn despite the elements. "It's like the story of Noah," little Lila O'Brien said, huddled under a blanket with her slate. "We're saving the school like he saved the animals." "That's a fine comparison," Eliza agreed, smoothing the girl's hair. "Though I hope we won't need 40 days and nights." As midnight approached and the storm finally began to ease, Caleb found himself alone with Eliza in the barn. The others had gone home, leaving them to finish securing the space for tomorrow's lessons. "Nora and I found evidence today," he said quietly, telling her about the railroad contracts and the fake photographs. "It's almost enough to take to a federal marshal." "Almost. We need one more thing. Proof that the town council knew about and participated in the fraud. Without that, Crowley can claim he acted alone, throw Pike to the wolves, and walk away clean." Eliza was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's a council meeting tomorrow night. Emergency session to discuss storm damage and infrastructure. What if they discuss more than that? You're thinking someone should listen in?" "I'm thinking," Eliza said carefully, "that the council chamber has very thin walls, and the storeroom next door has a connecting ventilation grate. I may have noticed this while attending previous meetings." Caleb smiled slowly. "Miss Hart, are you suggesting espionage?" "I'm suggesting that public servants discussing public business should expect the public might hear them." She met his gaze steadily. "Though someone would need to be in that storeroom, someone who could defend themselves if discovered. Someone like a traveling mail carrier who's good with locks." "That would be convenient." They stood facing each other in the lamplight, rain still pattering on the roof above. There was a charged moment when Caleb thought about kissing her again, properly this time, without an audience or ulterior motives. But Eliza stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should go," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Eliza," he called as she reached the door. "After this is over, after we've exposed them and saved your school, what then?" She paused, not turning. "Then, Mr. Ward," We'll see if what started as a deception might become something true. But first, we save the school. The children are counting on us." As Caleb made his way back to his room through the muddy streets, he reflected on the turns his life had taken. He'd come to Silver Mesa to deliver mail and had found himself embroiled in a fight for justice. More surprisingly, he'd found himself caring about the outcome, not just for the principle of it, but for the woman who refused to back down and the children who deserved better than what this town wanted to give them. Tomorrow night's council meeting would likely determine everything. If they could gather the final evidence, they could bring down Crowley's scheme. If they failed, but failure wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not when he'd seen what determination and quiet courage could accomplish, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp with the promise of change. Stars emerged between breaking clouds, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Caleb Ward, drifter and loner, realized with surprise that he was looking forward to tomorrow, not for the danger or the justice, but for the simple pleasure of seeing Eliza Hart smile when her students arrived eager to learn, despite everything trying to stop them. It was, he thought, a dangerous thing for a traveling man to start caring about staying in one place. But then again, the most worthwhile things in life usually were dangerous in one way or another. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 6, Fire in the Night, asterisk, asterisk. The council meeting had yielded more evidence than they'd dared hope, hidden in the storeroom. Caleb had heard everything through the ventilation grate. Crowley's detailed plans for the railroad depot, the bribes promised to council members, even jokes about how easily they'd fooled the town with their morality campaign. He'd written it all down, names and amounts, creating a document that would damn them all. But as Caleb emerged from his hiding place near midnight, he sensed something wrong. The streets were too quiet, even for the late hour. No dogs barked. No late-night revelers stumbled home from the saloons. The air itself felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. He was halfway to Ortega's when he saw the orange glow painting the sky. "Fire!" The cry went up from somewhere near the church, followed by the frantic clanging of bells. But Caleb was already running, his boots splashing through puddles left by yesterday's storm, because he knew with horrible certainty where the flames would be. The school barn was fully ablaze when he arrived. Fire licked from every window, smoke billowing into the star-filled sky. A crowd was gathering, some carrying buckets, but the intensity of the flames kept them back. "Where's Eliza?" Caleb grabbed Lupe Ortega's arm as she appeared with water buckets. "She left hours ago." Lupe's eyes widened in horror. "Dios mío, the children!" That's when they heard it. Faint cries from inside the burning structure. Without thinking, Caleb plunged toward the entrance, only to be driven back by a wall of heat. The main door was engulfed, the flames too intense. "Tommy and Lila," someone screamed. "Misses." O'Brien pushed through the crowd, held back only by strong hands. "They went to get their books. They must have fallen asleep inside." Caleb circled the building, looking for another way in. The side window was smaller but not yet consumed. He kicked it in, smoke pouring out in a black torrent. Behind him, he heard Eliza's voice, high and desperate. "Let me go. Those are my students." "You'll die in there." Nora Quinn had appeared, restraining Eliza while shouting orders to form a bucket brigade. Caleb shrugged out of his coat, doused it in a water barrel, and wrapped it around his head and shoulders. "Keep her here," he told Nora, then dove through the window before anyone could stop him. Inside was hell. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Heat pressed in from all sides, and overhead, beams groaned ominously. He dropped to his knees where the air was marginally clearer, calling out, "Tommy, Lila, call out if you can hear me." A weak cough answered from the far corner. Caleb crawled forward, guided by sound and instinct. His hand touched fabric, a small shoulder. Lila. curled protectively around her younger brother, both overcome by smoke. The journey back to the window seemed endless. Caleb carried Lila while dragging Tommy, his lungs burning, eyes streaming. Twice he thought he'd lost direction in the smoke. The wet coat had dried and begun to smolder. Just when his strength was failing, hands reached through the window, men from the crowd, pulling the children to safety. "Go back," someone shouted. "The roof's coming down." But Caleb turned for one last look, and that's when he saw it, a figure silhouetted against the flames, trying to save what books remained. Not a child, but Samuel Jenkins, Pike's apprentice. There was no time to think. Caleb lunged forward as the first beam crashed down, tackling Samuel and rolling them both toward the window. The world exploded in sparks and burning debris. Strong hands pulled them through the opening just as the entire roof collapsed in a roar of flame and destruction. Caleb lay on the muddy ground, gasping. As chaos erupted around him, Doc Whitlow worked over the children, Eliza kneeling beside them with tears streaming down her soot-stained face. The bucket brigade had given up trying to save the barn and now worked to keep the fire from spreading. "They're alive," Doc announced. "Smoke sick but alive. Get them to my office." As the children were carried away, their mother sobbing with relief, Eliza turned to Caleb. Without warning, she kissed him, not the calculated public display from the town square, but something raw and desperate and real. "You stupid, brave fool," she whispered against his lips. "You could have died." "So could you," he replied, remembering her struggle against Nora's grip. "Seems we're well matched." It wasn't until later, as Doc tended Caleb's burns and the fire was finally brought under control, that they learned the full truth. Samuel Jenkins, coughing but coherent, told his story. "I saw them sneaking around earlier. 3 men, mister. Pike hired. Heard them joking about smoking out the teacher for good. I tried to stop them, but they'd already set the fire. Then I saw the O'Brien children sneak in the back way." He started crying. "I'm sorry. I should have come forward sooner about everything." "You saved those children's lives by raising the alarm," Eliza said gently. "That's what matters." But Nora was focused on something else. 3 men. You said, can you identify them?" Samuel nodded, and that's when things turned, because among the crowd watching the fire, trying to blend in with concerned citizens, were 3 men with soot on their clothes and burns on their hands. One still had a bottle of kerosene poorly hidden under his coat. "That's them," Samuel pointed. The arrests happened quickly. Faced with evidence of their crime and the knowledge that they'd nearly killed 2 children, the arsonists broke. They named Pike as the one who hired them, Crowley as the one who ordered it. By dawn, both men were in custody, along with 2 council members who'd tried to flee town. The sun rose on a changed Silver Mesa. The barn school was gone, reduced to smoking rubble. But in the streets, something new was stirring. Parents who'd remained silent out of fear or propriety now spoke openly of their outrage. The attempted murder of children had crossed a line that no amount of moralizing could justify. "We need a new school," Mrs. Henderson declared at an impromptu gathering in the church. "A real one. Better than before. And a new mayor," someone else added. "One who won't sell us out to the railroad." As the morning progressed, donations poured in, lumber from the sawmill, labor from miners finishing their shifts, even glass windows from merchants who'd previously shunned Eliza. The territorial marshal arrived on the noon stage, taking custody of the prisoners and beginning a formal investigation. Caleb found Eliza standing in the ruins of the barn, sifting through ashes for any salvageable books. Her dress was ruined, her hands black with soot, but her back was straight as ever. "It's gone," she said quietly. "All of it. The books, the slates, the children's work. But not the learning," Caleb reminded her. "That's in their heads now. No fire can burn that away." She turned to him, and he saw not defeat, but determination in her eyes. "We'll rebuild, better and stronger, A proper school that... She stopped, seeming to realize something. I keep saying we, but you're free now. The fake engagement served its purpose. You can leave whenever you want. Caleb was quiet for a moment, looking at the mountains in the distance, the endless sky that had always called to him. Then he looked at the woman beside him, stubborn and brave and covered in ashes from a fight that wasn't even hers to begin with. Funny thing about that, he said. Seems I've gotten invested in seeing how this story ends. Besides, someone needs to teach those kids how to read trail signs and navigate by stars. Practical skills to go with all that book learning. Is that so? It is. Of course, if I'm staying, maybe we should make this engagement a bit more traditional. He pulled something from his pocket, his mother's ring, carried for years without knowing why. Eliza Hart, you've already kissed me twice. Once for show, once for real. What do you say to making it permanent? She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the crowd of townspeople already clearing ground for a new school. When she spoke, her voice was strong and clear. I say yes, Caleb Ward. Yes to you. Yes to rebuilding. Yes to showing this town that love and learning are stronger than hate and greed. This time when they kissed, half the town was watching, but neither of them cared. It was honest and true, like everything worth fighting for in Silver Mesa had become. Later that day, as plans for the new school took shape and the federal investigation began in earnest, Reverend Finch approached them. The man looked haggard, aged 10 years overnight. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Both of you. I let my position be used for evil purposes. I quoted scripture while children nearly died. His voice broke. I'll be resigning my pulpit. Don't, Eliza said, surprising everyone. Stay and do better. Show others how to admit mistakes and change. That's a lesson worth teaching too. As the sun set on Silver Mesa, painting the ruins of the old school in shades of gold and red, the sound of hammers rang out. The new school was already taking shape, rising from the ashes of the old. Tommy and Lila O'Brien, bandaged but determined, sat on lumber stacks directing the work with the authority of survivors. It'll have proper windows, Tommy announced, and a bell that ain't cracked. Isn't cracked, Lila corrected, then smiled. Miss Hart taught me that. Watching them, Eliza slipped her hand into Caleb's. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For riding into town when you did, for standing up when it mattered, for running into a burning building. She squeezed his hand. For staying. Well, Caleb said, someone once told me that being brave means being scared and doing it anyway. Turns out that applies to settling down as much as it does to fighting fires. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Silver Mesa worked on a town redeemed by crisis, a community forged in flame, and at the center of it all, a schoolteacher who'd refused to be shamed and a drifter who'd found a reason to stop drifting. The old school was gone, but from its ashes, something better was being born, and that, Caleb thought as he watched his future wife organize volunteers with the same quiet strength she'd shown throughout her ordeal, was the best kind of justice, the kind that built rather than destroyed, that brought people together rather than driving them apart. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, but tonight there was hope, and in a frontier town under endless skies, hope was sometimes all you needed to change the world. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 7. The Trial in the Dust, asterisk, asterisk. The courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was filled, with more people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the street. Judge Theodore Blackwood, sent from the territorial capital, surveyed the packed room with sharp eyes that missed nothing. This wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning for Silver Mesa. Caleb sat in the witness section, his testimony already given, beside him. Eliza held herself with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through months of persecution. The real drama would come from the defendant's table, where Silas Crowley sat in his finest suit, somehow still managing to look like he owned the room. Harlan Pike, by contrast, seemed to have shrunk, his usual bombast replaced by nervous fidgeting. "The court calls Deputy Nora Quinn," the bailiff announced. Nora took the stand with her evidence carefully organized. For the next hour, she methodically laid out the conspiracy, the railroad documents, the forged photographs, the testimony of the arsonists. Her presentation was precise, professional, and damning. Deputy Quinn. The territorial prosecutor, a young man named Harrison Wells, asked, "What first aroused your suspicions about this matter?" "The timing, sir. Mayor Crowley's campaign against Miss Hart began shortly after railroad surveyors passed through town. That seemed too convenient to be coincidence." Objection. Crowley's lawyer, imported from Denver at considerable expense, rose smoothly. Speculation. Sustained. The jury will disregard. But the seed was planted. As witness after witness took the stand, the pattern became undeniable. Lupe Ortega testified about the night Eliza had delivered a baby in the Mexican camp, the very night Pike's paper claimed she'd been seen in questionable circumstances. Doc Whitlow presented his medical logs confirming Eliza's whereabouts. Even Mr. Garrett from the general store, shamefaced and stumbling over his words, admitted to being pressured by Crowley to shun the schoolteacher. The most dramatic moment came when Samuel Jenkins took the stand, Pike's former apprentice, bandages still visible from the fire, spoke in a clear voice about the fake photographs, the specially commissioned articles, the meetings he'd overheard. Mr. Pike would say that truth didn't matter if the story sold papers and served their purpose. Samuel testified. "He taught me that journalism was about power, not facts. I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner." "And what changed your mind?" Wells asked gently. Samuel looked directly at Eliza. "Miss Hart taught me to read when I was just a printer's devil that nobody noticed. She said every person deserved the truth, deserved to make up their own mind. When I saw them trying to destroy her with lies," his voice cracked, "I couldn't be part of it anymore." The defense tried to paint Samuel as a disgruntled employee, Pike as an overzealous journalist, Crowley as a civic leader merely concerned about moral standards. But when Wells introduced the evidence Caleb had gathered from the council meeting, every word of their conspiracy carefully documented, their arguments crumbled. "Gentlemen of the jury," Wells said in his closing argument, "this case is about more than land fraud or arson. It's about men who would destroy an innocent woman's reputation, who would burn down a school with children inside. All for profit. They wrapped their greed in the flag of morality, used fear and prejudice as weapons. If we allow this to stand, what does that say about justice in our territory?" The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, not one of them would meet Crowley's eyes. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find—" "Guilty." "On the charge of land fraud?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit arson?" "Guilty." The convictions rolled on. Pike crumpled with each verdict. Crowley maintained his composure until the end. When Judge Blackwood pronounced sentence, "Silas Crowley, you betrayed the trust of this community in the worst possible way. You are sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Harlan Pike, your words were weapons aimed at an innocent woman. 10 years. As for the properties you've acquired through fraud, they are hereby returned to their rightful owners, with the school land placed in permanent trust for education." As the convicted men were led away, Crowley turned for one last look at Eliza. "You think you've won," he said, "but this town will never fully accept you. You'll always be the woman who caused trouble." "No," Eliza replied quietly. "I'll be the woman who taught their children. In the end, that's what will be remembered." Outside the courthouse, the celebration was subdued but heartfelt. Justice had been served. but the scars remained. The school still needed rebuilding. Relationships still needed mending. Miss Hart, Tommy O'Brien pushed through the crowd. Lila close behind. Does this mean we can have real school again? Yes, Eliza said, kneeling to embrace them both. A proper school with windows and heat and all the books we can fill it with. Over the next weeks, Silver Mesa transformed. The new school rose quickly, built with donated labor and materials. It was larger than the old one, with 2 rooms instead of 1, real glass windows, and a bell tower that stood straight and true. The bell itself was a gift from the territorial government, inscribed with the words, "Let truth and justice ring." Caleb threw himself into the construction, his skills with hammer and saw proving as valuable as his gun had ever been. He worked alongside men who'd once shunned Eliza, and slowly, barriers broke down. Shared labor had a way of doing that. "Never thought I'd see you settling down," Nora commented one afternoon, watching Caleb teach a group of boys how to properly frame a window. The famous Caleb Ward, trading his gun for a hammer. "Still got the gun," Caleb replied. "Just found better uses for my hands." "And better reasons to stay in one place," Nora added with a knowing smile. The school's dedication day dawned bright and clear. The entire town turned out, including some who'd been vocal in condemning Eliza months before. Reverend Finch, true to his promise to do better, offered a blessing that emphasized forgiveness and second chances. "We have all fallen short," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But from our failures, we can build something better. This school stands not just as a place of learning, but as a reminder that truth will prevail, that courage can overcome prejudice." Eliza stood to speak, wearing a new blue dress that Lupe and the other women had sewn as a gift. She looked out over the faces, her students eager and proud, their parents hopeful, even former enemies offering tentative smiles. "When I came to Silver Mesa," she began, "I believed that education was the great equalizer. These past months have taught me it's more than that. It's the great reconciler. In this school, all children will be welcome, rich and poor, native-born and immigrant, because knowledge belongs to no one group or class." She paused, finding Caleb's eyes in the crowd. "I've also learned that sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers, that courage can wear spurs and a gun belt, that love can grow in the harshest ground." The bell rang for the first time, clear and true, calling students to their lessons. As children streamed into the building, their voices bright with excitement, Silver Mesa watched a new chapter beginning. But there was other business to conclude. The railroad company, embarrassed by the scandal, agreed to route their line along the town's edge rather than through it. The depot would be built on land purchased fairly, and profits would partially fund the school's operations. It was a compromise that served everyone. "Funny how things work out," Doc Whitlow mused, watching the children through the school windows. Crowley wanted to destroy the school to make a fortune. Instead, his scheming ended up making the school stronger and richer than ever. "Justice has a sense of irony," Nora agreed. That evening, in the quiet of Eliza's small room behind Ortega's restaurant, she and Caleb finally had a moment alone. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of testimony, construction, and planning. Now, with the crisis past and the school established, they could think about their own future. "So," Eliza said, sitting beside him at the window, "what now the mail routes are calling? I'm sure all that open sky, all those distant towns." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a folded paper. "Actually, I got an offer today, from the town council. What's left of it. They want someone to handle security for the new depot. Keep the peace when the railroad workers arrive. Steady job. Decent pay." He paused. "If I wanted to stay." "Do you want to stay?" He turned to face her fully. "Eliza, I've spent years running from my past, from the things I've done. I thought staying in motion meant staying free, but these months here, fighting beside you, building something instead of destroying. It's the first time I've felt truly free in years."
"That doesn't answer my question."
"Yes," he said simply. "I want to stay. I want to wake up in the same place every morning, knowing you're teaching in that school we built. I want to help raise the next generation of Silver Mesa, maybe teach them that guns aren't the only way to solve problems. I want—" He took her hand. "I want to marry you, Eliza Hart. For real this time. What do you say?" She smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "I say yes. Caleb Ward. Though I warn you, I intend to keep teaching, and causing trouble when necessary, and taking in any child who needs learning, regardless of what anyone thinks. I wouldn't have you any other way." They kissed as the sun set over Silver Mesa, painting the new school in shades of gold. Tomorrow there would be lessons to teach and learn, a town to continue healing, a life to build together. But tonight, there was peace and promise and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories came not from guns or violence, but from simply refusing to give up. In the distance, the school bell caught the last rays of sunlight, a beacon of hope in a town that had found its way back from the brink. And in a small room above a Mexican restaurant, a schoolteacher and a former gunman planned a future neither had dared imagine when this story began. The dust had settled in Silver Mesa, revealing not just justice, but something rarer and more precious, a second chance for all who were brave enough to take it. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 8. The End and the Beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. Spring came early to Silver Mesa that year, painting the prairie with wildflowers and filling the air with the promise of renewal. The new school had been operating for 6 months now, its rooms filled with the voices of 43 students, more than ever before. The morning sun streamed through clean windows as Eliza wrote the day's lessons on a proper blackboard, her movements sure and practiced. "Mrs. Ward," Maria Delgado called out. "Will Mr. Ward be teaching us tracking again today?" Eliza smiled at the name she'd carried for 3 months now. "After arithmetic, Maria. Learning to read the land is important, but so is learning to read numbers." The wedding had been simple but perfect, held in the school itself with the whole town attending. Even those who'd once stood against her came to wish the couple well, understanding finally that some changes were worth embracing. Reverend Finch, transformed by his own redemption, had performed the ceremony with genuine joy. "I've married many couples," he'd said that day, "but rarely have I seen two people so well matched in courage and conviction." Now, as Eliza taught the morning lessons, she could see Caleb through the window, working with a group of older boys on building a stable for the school. The railroad had brought prosperity to Silver Mesa, but also challenges. New families arrived weekly, seeking opportunity, and the school grew to meet their needs. Education is not just about books, Caleb was telling the boys, showing them how to measure and cut lumber. It's about understanding the world around you, whether that's the written word or the grain of wood. Tommy O'Brien, fully recovered from his ordeal in the fire, worked with fierce concentration. He'd declared his intention to become an engineer, inspired by the railroad's arrival. His sister Lila, meanwhile, had shown a gift for teaching the younger children, often helping Eliza with the primer class. At noon, Eliza rang the new bell, a sound that never failed to fill her with satisfaction. The children poured out for lunch, their chatter mixing English, Spanish, and even some Chinese as friendships crossed lines that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "Mrs. Ward." Nora Quinn appeared at the schoolhouse door, now wearing a full sheriff's star. "Thought you'd want to know. We just got word from the territorial capital. They're making Silver Mesa the county seat. Means more families coming, more children needing education." "Then we'll need more teachers," Eliza said practically. "I've been corresponding with a teachers' college in Denver. They have recent graduates looking for positions." "Always thinking ahead," Nora smiled. "Just like when you suggested I run for sheriff. Who'd have thought this town would elect a woman to the job?" The same town that learned to value education over prejudice. Eliza replied. Change is possible. Nora, we're living proof. That afternoon brought a surprise visitor. A well-dressed woman stepped down from the stage, looking around uncertainly. Eliza recognized the type, Eastern educated, probably seeking adventure in the West. She approached the woman with a welcoming smile. Can I help you? I'm Eliza Ward, the schoolteacher here. Catherine Morrison, the woman replied, relief evident in her voice. I'm here about the teaching position. I received your letter about needing additional instructors. As Eliza showed Catherine around the school, sharing the story of its rebirth, she felt a deep satisfaction. The cycle was continuing, new teachers bringing new ideas, the school growing stronger with each passing season. That evening, the Wards sat on the porch of their new home, a modest but comfortable house built on land donated by grateful parents. The railroad depot glowed in the distance, steam from the evening train rising into the sunset sky. But it was the sound of children playing in the schoolyard that drew their attention. Any regrets? Eliza asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Caleb considered the question. I used to think freedom meant having no ties, no responsibilities. Now I know better. Real freedom is choosing your responsibilities, building something worth protecting. Speaking of building, Eliza said carefully, Doc Whitlow confirmed something today. Come winter, we'll need to add a nursery to the house. Caleb turned to stare at her, joy spreading across his weathered face. You mean? Yes, seems Silver Mesa will have another young mind to educate in about 7 months. He pulled her close, kissing her with the same intensity as that first public display in the town square, though now with tenderness born of real love. Our child will grow up in a town that values truth over prejudice, education over ignorance. That's a gift worth giving. As darkness fell over the prairie, lamps glowed in windows throughout Silver Mesa. At the Chinese laundry, Mr. Chen helped his children with their homework, proud that they could attend school freely. In the Mexican Quarter, families gathered to hear children read from books Eliza had secured through Eastern donations. At the sheriff's office, Nora Quinn studied law books, preparing for the responsibilities of maintaining order in a growing town. The next morning brought the usual organized chaos of a school day. Catherine Morrison, the new teacher, took the primer class while Eliza worked with the advanced students. Caleb had started a program teaching practical skills carpentry, basic veterinary care, and yes, tracking and wilderness survival. Education should prepare you for life, he explained to the assembled students. Whether you become a shopkeeper or a trail guide, a mother or a mayor, knowledge is your foundation. It was during the afternoon geography lesson that young Samuel Jenkins, now assistant editor of Silver Mesa's new newspaper, the truth seeker, burst through the door. Mrs. Ward, Mr. Ward, you need to see this. He held out a telegram, his hands shaking with excitement. Eliza read it aloud. Territorial Legislature commends Silver Mesa School Stop designated model for frontier education. Stop delegation visiting next month. Stop possible funding for expansion. Stop. The classroom erupted in cheers. Tommy O'Brien threw his hat in the air. Lila hugged her closest friend, and even the usually reserved older students couldn't contain their excitement. What does this mean, Mrs. Ward? Maria asked. It means, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion, that what we've built here will help other towns build better schools. Your courage, all of you who kept coming when times were hard, has made a difference beyond Silver Mesa. That Sunday, the whole town gathered for a celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of food from every culture represented in Silver Mesa. Music filled the air, Mexican guitars, Irish fiddles, even a Chinese flute. Children ran between the tables while adults shared stories and laughter. Hard to believe, Doc Whitlow said, raising a glass of cider, that a year ago this town was tearing itself apart over fear and lies. Towns are like people, Reverend Finch replied. They can choose to get better or worse. We're blessed that enough folks chose better. As the celebration continued, Eliza found herself at the old school site. The burned ground had been turned into a memorial garden with a simple stone marker: from destruction, growth; from ignorance, wisdom; from hate, love. Caleb found her there, as she knew he would. Remembering, appreciating, she corrected. Without that fire, we might have limped along for years with half measures and compromises. Sometimes the worst moments create the best opportunities. Speaking of opportunities, Caleb said, I got a letter today from an old friend who's marshalling down in Texas. Says there's a town there with similar problems. A school being pushed out by business interests. Wanted to know if I had any advice. And I told him to find himself a stubborn schoolteacher who won't back down. Worked pretty well here. They laughed, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. In the distance, a train whistle announced the evening express. Full of possibilities and new arrivals. Some would stay, adding to the tapestry of Silver Mesa. Others would pass through, carrying stories of a town that had faced its demons and emerged stronger. As the stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, Eliza and Caleb walked back to the celebration hand in hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more students than desks. The territorial delegation to prepare for their own child on the way. But tonight was for gratitude and joy. You know, Eliza said as they reached the schoolhouse, its windows glowing with lamplights. When I first arrived in Silver Mesa, I had a simple dream: to teach children to read and write and think for themselves. Seems like you succeeded, Caleb observed. We succeeded, she corrected. All of us together. That's the real lesson. Isn't it that a community is only as strong as its willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult? The bell in the school tower caught the moonlight, no longer cracked but whole and true. Soon it would ring again, calling another generation to learn not just facts and figures, but courage and compassion, in a frontier where might too often made right. Silver Mesa had proven that sometimes. The pen and the principle behind it really was mightier than the sword. As they rejoined the celebration, Eliza placed a protective hand over her still flat belly. Their child would grow up in a town transformed, where the schoolhouse stood at the center of community life, where children of all backgrounds learned side by side, where a woman could be sheriff and a former gunman could teach the value of peace. It was more than she had dared dream when she stepped off the stage 2.5 years ago, a widow seeking purpose in the wilderness. But then, the best stories often ended far from where they began, shaped by the courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The music played on, the children danced, and Silver Mesa celebrated not just a school saved, but a future claimed. And in the morning, when the bell rang clear and true across the prairie, calling young minds to grow and learn, it would sound like victory, not of one person or cause, but of hope itself. Stubborn and enduring as the grass that bent but never broke before the wind. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the dust and dreams of Silver Mesa. I hope Eliza and Caleb's story has touched your heart as it has mine. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this story meant to you. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Wild West Night, give it a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover this story of courage, love, and the power of education to change lives. Until we meet again on the frontier of imagination, keep riding toward your own horizons. Happy trails, partners.